Hello and welcome back to the Bird's Eye View podcast. We are here on Thursday, November 14th. I'm your host, Zach Worden, joined as always by Jori Negin-Shecter. And a lot of news in the Toronto Blue Jays hemisphere. There's been meetings, there's been rumblings, there's been people leaving, people getting promotions. And we're going to get into that a little bit today before we kind of talk about both of our pieces, which we wrote over on our Substack. And we're going to talk a little bit about what we think would be an ideal offseason for the Blue Jays. Jory, how have things been for you as this offseason has slowly progressed?
Yes, slowly is the word I would use. Things have been very slow. We still await something from the Blue Jays end, but we're hearing a lot of whispers about exciting things may be happening. One Juan Soto, perhaps, in the cards. Do we dare get Shohei Ohtani a second time? I guess that's up to you, loyal listeners.
Yeah, it's the Jeff Passan releases the article the other day that the Blue Jays have the first meeting, and we assume that meeting is done because I saw that the Red Sox meeting with him is today, which would of course imply that their first meeting had already been finished. So, interesting to see if we hear anything about that, about how the meeting went with Soto, and if meeting first is good. I mean, what do you think? Is the first meeting a good thing or is that a bad thing?
Well, here's what I wonder is did they meet first because that's what time worked for Vladdy Guerrero Jr.? Because that's what I would have based the meeting around. I would have said, hey, Vladdy, we're going to go try to get your best friend. Do you want to maybe hop on the plane with us and make a pitch? Meanwhile, he doesn't even have an extension done, but, that's a different discussion. But I would figure that having the first meeting isn't bad. I don't know if it's good. I feel like you probably want the closer. You kind of want the last one. But if you're not last, then I guess first would be probably better than somewhere in the mushy middle.
Yeah, do you think that he's going to take second meetings? I don't really know how, free agent processes
You
work,
would
but
you think he probably gets flown out to Dunedin if he's feeling the vibe, and you'd probably think that they probably put on a similar playbook to the one that they put on last year
you
with
think they're
Ohtani.
running it back?
I mean, it almost worked, so I don't see the harm.
Well, but it didn't work.
That's a different discussion. That's a different discussion.
Yeah, we can kind of move on, but I think that of course leading into it, obviously the Juan Soto stuff where, John Heyman's talking about them as being like a legit threat. Robert Murray's tweeting that they are going to be in the mix, and I think that's kind of what we expected all along because of course they are in the financial group of teams that can afford to pay Juan Soto. I mean, all teams can afford to pay Juan Soto, but they're in the group of teams that will pay Juan Soto what he is going to get. And now that, of course, it's confirmed with the meeting and everything like that. I mean, how is your feelings around this change? Like, obviously at first, based on what happened last year with Ohtani, the general feeling around, I think, Blue Jays fandom is kind of reluctance to get hurt again, to dive in or anything like that. Are you starting to kind of get into the area of belief that Juan Soto could be playing at the Rogers Center for the foreseeable future?
You know,
Or are you still
last
reluctant?
last December, I remember that we had that episode right before Otani signed. It might have been the week before, it might have been 2 weeks before. I don't remember exactly. But I remember you saying something along the lines of it's starting to feel like it might happen. The thought of maybe covering Otani as a Blue Jay next year and what that could mean for the Blue Jays, for us, for the city of Toronto. There was a really palpable level of excitement kind of coursing through basically the city. I mean, people I know that weren't even Blue Jays fans, that weren't even baseball fans, were keeping tabs on the Otani sweepstakes. It doesn't feel quite at that level yet. This feels a lot more like a run of the mill free agency. And while I do sense the Jays have a more legitimate shot at Soto than perhaps was anticipated earlier in the offseason, I would still say the chances and the excitement and the anticipation is dramatically lower than it was when Ohtani was at a fever pitch. Now, when he was at a fever pitch, obviously there was the whole Robert Herjavec airplane situation, and we haven't quite reached that level of Juan Soto hysteria, but we're probably about a week and a half to 2 weeks from that, which is more than I thought you were going to be getting at this stage of the offseason. The other thing that I also want to very quickly say is that broadly, it kind of sounded like this was going to be a bit of a run of the mill offseason. But we've now, as you mentioned, heard from Passan, and we've heard now the quote I want to pull up is from Buster Olney. He goes, "There's one team that absolutely reeks of desperation, and that's the Blue Jays." That's the quote to me. That's the money quote that tells me that this front office, even though the payroll may not dramatically shift one way or another, there's still going to be a concerted effort to go out and improve if certain players are available.
I'm really glad that you threw it back to last year because I want to take you on a trip through the last couple months of 2023 through the eyes of the Bird's Eye View podcast. So I have the list of our episodes up from last year. So on October 31st, we recorded this very episode, Building an Ideal Blue Jays Offseason. And I remember we recorded that episode and we're like, we're not even going to talk about Ohtani because obviously it would be ideal, but it's never going to happen. We record that episode. Our next episode, a couple weeks later, could Shohei be a Blue Jay? So the belief kind of starts to creep up, right? Like it's kind of a slow build there. Our next episode, we have Ethan Diamandis on, and I remember, of course, we ask him this or that, what color Blue Jays jersey are you going to get for Ohtani? And he's like, oh, that's not going to happen. So again, it's still kind of a topic. And then our next episode, the next week, is called Shohei Shenanigans, and this is the episode where after he met in Dunedin with the Blue Jays and did the tour there. So, we kind of see that slow creep and then, the next the next two episodes are the winter meetings wrap and then the Ohtani actually signs with the Dodgers. So, we kind of see that slow build last year. And I know like the timeline is a little bit different this year, but I'm curious like if that's going to happen again, if once Soto finishes with his meetings and say he does take second meetings and the Blue Jays are in, the final two or three teams with the Yankees and the Mets or whoever it is, if we kind of have that slow creep again. Like, is there a world where that ends up happening?
Of course, there's a world where that ends up happening, but I think that there's a lot more reluctance isn't the word, but there's a certain level of guardedness that I think that Blue Jays fans are going to have towards this whole scenario that obviously was not present last time around. I mean, the excitement reached fever pitch levels. We're talking about CP24 tracking the airplane. We're talking about, I have a very vivid memory of my dad coming into my bedroom and my brother coming into my bedroom, and we were trying to watch the feed of the airplane unloading, right? That was like another level of excitement for who was on the airplane. There was leaked audio of the plane landing and the air traffic controllers.
Didn't they say like we know you have a very special guest on board or something like that?
It was absolute lunacy, right?
Oh
And
man.
I just don't think we will get to that point with Juan Soto. It would be pretty surprising to me.
Yeah, that's man, what a trip down memory lane that is. You kind of put that out of your memory, you try and forget it, but just an incredible off
But
season.
here's the thing too, is that remember that all happens and then it's basically radio silence and then it goes IKF Kiermaier. And it was like, that's it. That's what you're gonna do. Obviously, Justin Turner was in there, and they made a couple other moves, but it was an underwhelming bounce back. And I think that Blue Jays fans had hoped that there were big plans. I mean, last year they were considered the favorites for Soto briefly to trade for him for a period. So this offseason, it in some ways it feels like they have their hand in a lot more cookie jars, and there's a lot more break in case of emergency options that they might be able to take a swing at. Soto being one, although we've heard from other sources this is really just a bit of a Boris play. And then, of course, you've got Passan mentioning Burns. You've got Passan mentioning Fried. I mean, I don't know if you want to get into that quite yet. I know that we still have some other newsy stuff we kind of need to get into, but there's lots of stuff happening right now, and the Blue Jays are in the mix.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit of a product of like the free agent market too. Like you look at last year's group of free agents, and it was Shohei Ohtani and Matt Chapman and Jorge Soler, right? And this year it's Shohei Ohtani, Corbin Burns, Alex Bregman, Max Fried, Anthony Santander, Teoscar Hernandez. I guess Teoscar was, of course, a free agent last year as well, but much more appealing this year coming off the year that he just had with the Dodgers than he was coming off the year that he had with the Mariners. And so yeah, it is good to know that it sounds like they, of course, do have the plans for if they don't get Soto and plans to pursue other stars and kind of be able to fall back and that their special fund or whatever you want to call it, like their extra allotment of money for Juan Soto actually does apply to a group of other players. I believe I've seen that reported that, it's like a bushel or a bundle of other players that they'd be willing to go over the luxury tax for instead of just sticking that 25 million if they don't get Soto. So we can rip through this other news quick. I don't think it's as relevant as some of the other stuff we're going to talk about, but um Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Silver Slugger Award winner for the second time in his career. Not really a shock that he won it. I think by far and away the best first baseman in baseball this year. Expecting him to be named to the All MLB team. I believe that's tonight that they reveal that. So, looking forward to him getting some more accolades for the season.
Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, it solidifies his place as a core piece of this Blue Jays team. As if needed any more confirmation, we've spent so much time, it feels like, over the last basically 2.5 months really giving him love. We called him like our birdies MVP, and we waxed poetic when he won this award and won that award and was nominated for this award and nominated for that award. Just an all-around excellent year, as we've reiterated over and over again, for Vladimir Guerrero Jr.
Yes. In addition to that, Mark Tremuta is now the amateur director of scouting. So congrats to him for getting the promotion. I don't think there's too much we can dive into that. Of course, he was with the Mets when they drafted Pete Alonso and Mark Vientos and all these guys that they traded for Francisco Lindor. So, solid track record there. A guy who came up as a scout with the Blue Jays and came back as a special assistant last year. So I do wonder if there was a little bit of grooming for the position there when they brought him back as a special assistant. But yeah, it seems like a solid enough choice.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously, the Blue Jays farm system in a bit of a rut, to put it very lightly. But hopefully, his decision come next July is not very difficult when Ethan Holiday becomes the first overall pick for the
Whoa.
Toronto Blue Jays.
I'm on the Jace Laviolette train.
Okay. We'll sort that out when we get there. We'll sort that out when we get there. I mean,
Okay.
I'm just saying a holiday
Yes,
rivalry in
yes.
the AL East
It's
would be
it's
fun.
it's much easier to pick between like the three guys at number one than like the 20 guys at
The
number eight.
30 million guys the rest of the
Yeah.
way. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the last pretty interesting piece of news is that Matt Hague has left the Blue Jays to become the hitting coach of the Pittsburgh Pirates. Pirates had quite a week like hiring coaches like Matt Hague, and then they got Brent Strom, who was of course the Astros pitching coach. As they kind of came up and had all these guys reinvent their careers. And then he was in Arizona for the past few years. So Matt Hague joining him there, like it seems like they're going to be pretty well coached in Pittsburgh.
That's probably the hope. Yeah, that's a tough loss for the Blue Jays. I mean, who knows how much any given hitting coach really impacts things, but we heard a ton about how important Matt Hague was to this Blue Jays team. Spencer Horwitz had nothing but good things to say. Ernie Clement had nothing but good things to say. All the Buffalo boys had nothing but good things to say. And so that's a tough loss. And I'm not really totally sure if there was maybe like a solution, if there was a way to keep him, because he was getting a promotion. And the Blue Jays is, it's common courtesy across sports, but particularly in baseball, that if there's a promotion available elsewhere, then you're not going to block him. So
Yeah.
good on him for getting that promotion. Well deserved, no doubt, but could leave a hole in the Blue Jays coaching staff next year. That's for sure.
Yeah. A little bit more on David Popkins' plate.
Guess we'll see.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to what this episode is all about, and that is, of course, building an ideal Blue Jays offseason. I want to start with both of our pieces on Substack. If you haven't checked them out yet, you can. I'll drop them in the link on YouTube. I'll include the link on and everything on Spotify to find these pieces where we go through and build an ideal Blue Jays offseason. Before we kind of get into them, I do want to preface by saying like an ideal Blue Jays offseason is signing Juan Soto, signing Roki Sasaki, and signing, all of your favorite free agents, trading for all your favorite trade pieces. But of course, in the context of us working through these pieces, we limited ourselves to the 20 to 25 million dollars that the Blue Jays have available in there before they hit the first luxury tax threshold. So just if you go reading them and you're not seeing Juan Soto, don't be disappointed because we do know that that would be ideal. But of course, we did limit ourselves. And Jory, let's start with yours because I think we had fairly similar pieces and fairly similar ideas, but of course executed differently. And I mean, I'm gonna get you to talk about your biggest move and your favorite move. And I'll let you pick what your biggest one is because I think there's a couple contenders.
Yeah. So there's two moves I think that are maybe biggest per se, and they're different in how they kind of go out and accomplish things. The big signing, of course, is Tyler O'Neill coming over from the Red Sox on a 3-year, $42 million deal. That's what I had him priced at. And to me, this one just made a lot of sense. He's been linked to the Blue Jays by some sources, and he plays that corner outfield spot that the Blue Jays need, and he provides a lot of pop, which the Blue Jays need as well. So
Apparently
to
not.
me, well, I'm sorry.
Apparently they don't need a lot of pop, according
Well,
to both of our pieces.
that's a different. That's a. They don't need a lot of Zach pop, but they do need a lot of power, and and Tyler O'Neill provides that. He's not the perfect player by any means, but really the perfect player wasn't available with $25 million to basically spend, which is the number that Shai Davidi has basically reported that the Blue Jays are, roughly speaking, going to be able to work with.
Before
Now
their
we were
special allocated, whatever.
Juan Soto, maybe not number. The move that both of us made, the other big move, and I'm surprised you made it because I thought I was being courageous doing so, was non-tendering Jordan Romano, who, unless his arm is cooked, probably should be a Blue Jay next year. But there's been all these whispers about, there's a real serious chance they non-tender him, and they have a decision to make. I think it's later this week on the 19th, I believe, whether or not they choose to tender him a contract. But I think that based on what we don't know, which is never really a great way to go about operating, but unfortunately, it's what we're working with. He's coming off an elbow injury. I don't know if I don't know if he had any procedures done on his elbow, but certainly he had lots of treatment and he missed basically the whole year. When he pitched, he was not himself. And there's a little bit of kind of magic beans going into the next season if you're working with him, but he's going to be turning 32 next year, I believe. He's aging. That much is not up for discussion. And he's not as good as he was at his very best. And he's now dealing with an elbow injury, which is always scary. And the fact that he didn't end up getting Tommy John, that might still be on the table for him, right? So it felt like a big commitment to go out and spend that almost $8 million on him when there were better options available, which is the other big move I made, which was going out and acquiring Devin Williams for a package headlined by Spencer Horwitz. Now, as I kind of outlined in the piece, I like Horwitz. I like Horwitz a lot. I think that he was probably the best story of the Blue Jays this year. But if you have any intention of extending Vladimir Guerrero Jr., which I ultimately didn't do because I don't know what that's going to cost. I think ideally you're able to get him at something around 10,350, but again, who's to even say? He just doesn't have a spot. He's not a second baseman. He's clearly not capable of the position, even though they gave him a go. They even bailed on the experiment after a little while. And if he's not there, then he's a bench piece. But to me, you're far better off selling high on him and trying to turn him into someone like a Devin Williams, who is, in my estimation, the best pitcher potentially, easily the best reliever that's going to get dealt this offseason. And based on the monetary value and what he's owed and so forth, it just made so much sense, in my estimation, to go out and acquire him and try to fix the bullpen. Now, favorite move, though, is neither of those. It's my last big move was the AJ Minter one. I'm a big AJ Minter believer. I mean, I'd heard some stuff about him and about teams swirling on him, and I kind of dug into him a little bit. And he is a guy that would be really, 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 really smart to, or a team rather, would be really, really, really smart to try to buy low on him. And I'm not sure if the contract I gave him is necessarily buying low, but he would be a really big ad for a team lacking a left-handed relief option, not named Brendan Little, given the loss of Hennis Cabrera.
Yeah, I liked it. I think O'Neill would be kind of the ideal guy to slot in behind Vlad. He obviously has the ability to protect him with the power. I obviously had a similar idea to you as the trading for a closer after non-tendering Romano, as I traded for Ryan Helsley. Going about it in a little bit of a different way. You know, he saved me a little bit of money. Helsley did in my building the offseason. So that's kind of why I went in that direction. I honestly don't think you can really go wrong with either of them because they're both so disgusting and so good and both 1 year away from free agency and all this stuff. And then yeah, I mean Minter would be a really nice piece to kind of to get in there. I think I saw, you know, you can believe what you want when it comes to MLB executive burner, whether it's Mike Elias or not, but I think he tweeted that, you know, a lot of teams are planning on Minter as their fallback if they miss out on Tanner Scott.
Yeah, I mean
But
that
of
makes a
course,
lot of
that is
sense, but
from a potential, you know, meme account, whatever. But I mean, it does make sense, I think,
yeah,
from
I don't know what MLB burner executives track record is. It's certainly not the most reliable source, but if Mike Elias wants to spill the beans every now and again, who am I to stop?
yeah. I'll talk about my piece a little bit. Yeah, like I mentioned, traded for Ryan Helsley. The cost I guess was probably a little bit higher for me in just the way that I feel like St. Louis would probably be interested in some different areas of the Blue Jays roster than Spencer Horwitz, who of course I end up trading in a different deal. But yeah, I think a dude who throws 100 would be pretty fun to add. I think that's probably the biggest move I'd say I'd make, just kind of based on the deal and who got shipped out in that. Being Jake Bloss and Addison Barger, like I as you go through it, you kind of realize just how many pieces the Blue Jays have of like this infield outfield kind of mix that like aren't necessarily guys that you want to slot in every day. So I think kind of tough to go about it that way and just to trade away some of those guys when clear up that glut a little bit. My favorite move is not signing Jurickson Profar, which I did. Kind of talked myself into that one. I know I think it was on here that I said not my favorite free agent signing because I'm not sure if you can rely on him being able to continue the quality of contact that he made this year, but diving into it a little bit, sounds like there was a tangible swing change there. He added a leg kick and was able to post the best season of his career, Silver Slugger and All-Star. So fun year from him. I think he'd be fun at. I slotted him as the Blue Jays leadoff hitter, a guy with great approach, but I think you could probably slot him 1 through 5 and be happy about it. Favorite move I made was actually signing Randall Grichuk because I think that he, obviously the name, yes, Blue Jays fans, whatever, it's a reunion.
Can I very briefly jump in here
Yes.
because I didn't even give Randall Grishuk a second look. And there's such a bad taste in my mouth from his last go around with the Blue Jays. Can you walk me through this one and maybe make this make some sense?
Yeah, I just, you know, with the way that the Blue Jays have set up their roster, I felt like I needed somebody, or the Blue Jays need somebody who hits left-handers really well. And Randall Grichuk is that guy. I mean, I listed it in the piece. He's eighth in WRC plus, eighth in slugging, seventh in OBP, 15th in ISO over the past two seasons against lefties. And last year he was even better against them. And then even last year as well, he was above league average against righties, and is a guy who can still reliably play a corner defensive spot when you need it. So I felt like he was a pretty good fit just to the roster as a guy who can come off the bench against lefties, or can be a DH, corner outfielder, kind of give some guys a blow when they need it, if they need to DH themselves, and he can kind of just slot in a bunch of different spots and hit lefties really well. And even if you need to put him in against righties, he's not going to be completely overwhelmed. So that's why I went in that direction.
I I see it. I see the fit. I just, man, it doesn't scare you off anything about the lack of track record for this guy.
I mean, I wrote about it just being the last 2 years, but it's actually been the past few years. I think that he's been really good against lefties. And I think when you look at, like, he kind of has the same quality contact thing where, like, last year he completely popped up as Profar, where I think he had a 368 xWOBA in total last season. And I think even if you go back a couple years to 2022, he's been really good against lefties. So I think that he's obviously figured out something that way. And then just with the him probably being a little bit of a cheaper option, I needed that money to save on that left-handed smashing guy who I could add to the lineup. And it's kind of something that they didn't have on the roster.
Yeah, and the money thing too. I think we both wrote about it in our final thoughts that there was such a difficult maneuverability with this roster and what we
Yeah.
could even do and so forth, right? Like it's so unbelievably, if it is that $25 million that it's reported, and of course, obviously, we both cleared up about 10 million in addition to that through basically dumping half the bullpen.
Yeah.
But it's so incredibly tight if they are actually going to be working with that kind of money. They so deeply, so badly need one of these game breaker guys to blow past that number. They
Yeah.
so badly need it.
Yeah, 100%. One thing that we both did that I thought was pretty interesting was in the bullpen, kind of relying on a lot of guys who are already on the roster or in the organization. Of course, you add Williams and Minter, I add Helsley, and then add a couple other pieces through trade. But for the most part, both of us were pretty set on guys. It wasn't like we were going out and adding five relievers, which, some people have said that they need to do after such a bad year. What is it about, like, Chad Green, Eric Swanson, Brendan Little, Ryan Burr that gives you enough confidence in that group to be better? It just with kind of
That's a
the
good question, Zach. Thank you for asking such an insightful and thought provoking question. You've really made me think about the decision to bring back five relievers from the worst bullpen in baseball. And for that, I am so grateful for you for asking such a wonderful, thought provoking, and interesting question. Why don't we think about that question a little bit longer? Just so that, no, I honestly, like, what choice do you have? Like, it really kind of does come down to that. You can't remake a bullpen in a day as much as we kind of try to. And I actually, quietly, the biggest issue here is Chad Green is making way too much money. It's not even like he's being overpaid. Like, he's fine, but you really need him to be an effective dude. And I'm not 100% sure if he is. And if you're going to spend big on him, and it becomes an issue of where do other pieces fit around that, and how much do you really want to allocate money wise to your bullpen? The Blue Jays could have spent more. They could have, in either of our simulations or whatever, we could have maybe gone after a guy like Tanner Scott if we needed to. Like, we could have really spent a lot of money, but like they don't have enough power on the team. They needed some mash.
Yeah, I think one thing that you did better than I did was you pushed a guy like Chad Green down the leverage index, right? Like by bringing in Williams and Minter, your late game solution is Williams, Swanson, Minter, and then say a Cuban guy who you move to the bullpen. Um, Whereas in mine, it's like Helsley, Swanson, Green, and then relying a lot on Brendan Little to kind of step up, right? So I think that that's one area that you did better than I did as far as like moving some of the questionable guys down the leverage index for the Blue Jays and improving like the late game solutions, which you know is would be obviously ideal when you're still not 100% sure where Chad Green is going to be, where Eric Swanson's going to be, even where Brendan Little's going to be. I mean, moving those guys down is probably the way that you want to go about it instead of what I did, where it was like getting Helsley at the back end and then kind of backfilling at the top with some of the trades and then signing, you know, some of these minor league guys and trying to shoot at it that way. But it's going to be interesting to see what they really do. I think when I first tackled it, I'm looking at it, I'm like, I got way too much to do and not enough money to do any of it. So it was like you got to get your big guys in there and then fill out kind of below that. But I kind of think that the way that you were able to touch on so many different parts of the roster was a little bit better than the way that I built out mine.
Yeah, but then also I look at the lineup that I'm trotting out there and I was like, who is playing where for me? It's a bit of a nightmare. I mean, like I traded Horwitz and I traded Davis Schneider, and then I looked at my bench and I was like, oh God, this is a minor league bench almost, right? This is not a good enough hitting team for a team that, you can't win every game 1-0. And not that I've built the team to do so, but Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins have done so. And it's kind of like you're trying to dance this kind of fine line. Whereas on your end, the lineup looked a lot more complete. Mind you, the pitching, of course, was a little bit weaker, right? So it's really a question of, are you a guy that feels that the Blue Jays should address their hitting and maybe backfill the bullpen? Or do they need to find some bullpen stability and maybe believe in some of their youth? Because they do have some options. I mean, Alan Roden, I think, was on both of our on the cusp guys, and I think both of us are pretty big believers in him. Even you more than I am, and I think I'm pretty high on him given his projections from Fangraphs and stuff, right? So
Yeah.
it's a bit of a where do you want to allocate your cash?
Yeah, 100%. And I think you're right. Like, I mean, obviously I have Irrelvis in my starting nine as a platoon at least, and I think there'd be room for him to grow into like a starting role, and you have him on the bench and or sorry, in the minors to start, which I think if he's not in your starting nine, that he has to be in the minors because he's going to be a guy that needs to play. Um, but Roden is a good point. I think he's a guy who probably could make an impact at some point this year, somehow. And one thing too that, you know, we didn't factor in because he's going to be on the team, but Dalton Varsho is going to miss the beginning of the season, right? So that opens up playing time in center field, and whether that's Joey Loperfido, Jonathan Clase, Nathan Lucas as guys who are going to have to fill in that role. Like, I mean, there's going to be openings for these guys who are on the bench in the minors to play over the course of the year through injury or um, just, you know, guys missing time or whatever, however it ends up.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mishmash. Like, this is a team that really kind of lacks an identity in a way that it didn't even as recently as like 2021 and 2022 to a degree. Definitely in 2021, they were mashers, and they've kind of gone away from that and they've become this kind of defensive team. But now without Dalton Varsho as kind of your centerpiece of that, you don't look so good.
Yeah. 100%. And if you want to check out those pieces, I highly encourage you to go read them on our Substack. You know, a lot of work went into it, especially for me. I think I ended up with like six different iterations of mine before kind of finalizing it. So, a lot of fun to put those together. And yeah, please go check them out if you can. It was a lot of fun. But let's, Jory, talk about some of the guys that we didn't sign. I think this is kind of where the conversation gets interesting and kind of what we think of the guys who, you know, either were too expensive or just kind of didn't end up being on the roster. And just kind of looking at it, I mean, was who were some of the guys that you were also looking at for doing this, or some of the guys that you really wanted to but weren't able to afford, other than Juan Soto?
Um, I think the biggest one is probably Jock Peterson. Um, just based on the, you know, a little bit of it's based on kind of the expected numbers, a lot of the StatCast stuff. He's got a lot of red lollipops on his lollipop page. And he would have been really nice to get, but a lot of the projections have him making like 16, 17 a year. And if he's a DH only almost, excuse me, he's certainly not an everyday left fielder. That's a really, really dangerous proposition to drop a multi-year, you know, what is that? That's almost 60% of your money in one fell swoop, right? So you're kind of in a bit of a bind there where you can't go out and address the bullpen. So he's a guy that I really, really thought about. Another guy that I sniffed around, and I wrote this in the piece. Um, I thought about maybe a guy like a Jack Sawinski because of his outfield utility, and he had a really decent, really solid year 2 years ago, and then last year just fell off a cliff. But I don't know what kind of matchup the Jays have for the Pirates. The Pirates need a first baseman, and I'm not sure if I want to trade Spencer Horwitz for Jack Sawinski. So maybe you're looking at a pitcher, but it becomes a bit of a kind of a give and take. So I mean there were guys that I thought about that I looked at that I sniffed around on, but it was so tight where you could really only afford to make one major signing. I mean, last year, uh, I remember going out and I went out and acquired a late arbitration Tyler O'Neill, and I went out and like made some moves, and then had so much money left over. I went out and picked up Lucas Giolito as a depth starter for like $16 million. Right, that was not the case this year. It was a much more Moneyball give and take, slithering through the minutia of the contracts, trying to make all the puzzle pieces fit.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And I mean, as I went through it, like Max Fried was one of the guys that I was trying really hard to get on there, but it was almost like he would have eaten up the entirety of the um money that we had available with what he's going to command. And I mean, of course, looking at the top of the free agent market, like is there anybody that you're really saying no to? Like if they sign Adames, I think you're happy with that. Bregman, I think you're probably happy with that. Like he's a good defender. Um, I know the batted ball stuff. Like he kind of has like the profile that scares you a little bit getting into a multi-year deal. But I think he would probably be an all right guy to sign and kind of the guy that the Blue Jays would target because he's so good defensively and he doesn't really strike out all that much. Um, and then of course like Fried, Snell, um, Flaherty, all these guys, like I think you're probably pretty happy with. Teoscar probably falls into that group. Santander, like I think you're probably happy, like looking at it if they do end up with any of those guys. But of course, that would be going into their money that's saved for making a few big splashes or one big splash, right? So
Well, I'm surprised that you didn't have a Santander deal, but was he just too expensive?
I think so. I mean, when you look at it, yeah, like Fangraphs has him projected for a 5-year, $100 million contract, which is a lot. And I know a lot of people like have kind of been dumping on Santander as a potential free agent option, and I understand that, but I mean for what the Blue Jays need, I do think that he would be a really good fit just based on like he's gonna hit probably 30 home runs next year. I think you can probably take that to the bank and be set with a guy as him or setting him as your cleanup hitter next year. I think you could be happy with that. But the later years, yeah, I do understand where you would be a little bit concerned by that. I think comparing him to Teoscar is interesting because both of them are going to be like good clubhouse presences who hit a lot of home runs. Um, but Santander actually strikes out less and chases less than Teoscar. So I think he's a better fit, but he would also probably be a guy that you would have to move off of defensively before Teoscar, and Teoscar's not a great defender anyways. So it kind of, shows you just how bad Santander is in the field. But yeah, like I mean, he would have been a guy that with more money, he would have probably been the guy that I would have gone after instead of Profar. Um, Pair switch hitters, I would have probably gone with the guy who hits more home runs and he doesn't strike out a ton anyways. So that's probably the way I would have gone. But I do understand the fears there. But I think if they sign him, that there shouldn't be the narrative that, oh no, he's going to age so poorly.
Yeah. What I'm gathering from this is that the Blue Jays are going to need a they're going to need a miracle. They're going to need a Chris Sale for Vaughn Grisham type of trade. They're going to need that would be really nice. Or,
That would be, yeah.
it's been about a decade, I think it was, since or I think it was the 12th anniversary just a few days ago of the massive Marlins Jays blockbuster that obviously didn't go great in the end, but the Jays are going to have to fleece somebody. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm not sure if this is a front office in a position to do so. I don't know if they have the prospect capital that other teams covet. And I don't know if there's any teams out there that are selling low on guys. Pick your poison. But this is a team with a lot of decisions to make and not a lot of options.
Yeah, 100%. Before we get out here, I want to get your take because, talking about that they are going to have a miracle. And I think that miracle either comes in form of one of these big free agents signing with Toronto and making the decision to come there, which then probably pushes the Blue Jays to spend a little bit more money, right? Like it's only going to take one of these guys to realistically push them over the luxury tax threshold. It's going to take one of them to push them over. So then once they get over, then they'd be able to spend a little bit more because it opens up more money for them before that second threshold. Um, or it's going to have to come through a trade. And, obviously the reporting has been that they're all in on starting pitching and the starting pitching market is going to move first and they're in more on starters than anybody had expected. Do you think that means that it is going to be a trade for a bat that they're going to have to pursue if their focus right now is on starting pitching?
It sure seems like that, but I just struggle to see who that guy is. You're not hearing a lot in terms of bats on the market right now. And maybe I'm forgetting some guys, maybe I'm overlooking some guys. But the stuff that you're hearing right now, it's not a lot on the bat front. It's more on the pitching front
Yeah.
in terms of guys that are available. You've heard about Jordan Montgomery, and obviously he's expensive and this and that, and probably doesn't make a ton of sense for the Jays, but he's a guy that's had his name float around a lot. Or obviously, both of us had Helsley and Williams. Like, it's pitching that is apparently available on the market, and hitting wise, the best name was Brent Rooker, and he's not going anywhere. So if it's not him, who's the second best hitter that might get traded? I can't name them off the top of my head.
I'm just gonna read you like the MLB trade rumors top offseason trade candidates really quick, and you're gonna like it's gonna reinforce your point. Like they go pitcher, 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 pitcher. Number five overall is Yandy Diaz. Is the number one trade candidate this offseason. A few issues there with bringing him to Toronto, I would say, in the way of positional blockage for him. And then the next hitter, you have to go all the way down to number eight, and it is Josh Naylor, who once again not a fit positionally. And then you go to Nolan Arenado, who's probably way too expensive and not good enough to really move the needle. Wilson Contreras, who said he wants to stay in St. Louis. Jorge Soler, who was already traded. Christian Vasquez, and that's where you're at is Christian Vasquez, who's making $10 million next year, and that's a backup catcher. And trade MLB trade rumors has him as the like fifth best hitter available.
Yeah, it's not really a robust market. So something surprising is going to have to happen, and it's not like something surprising has never happened. I don't feel like the Chris Sale trade was anything kind of rumored last year or anything like that. And I mean, again, if you want to go way back in Blue Jays history, it's not like Josh Donaldson was supposed to get traded when the Blue Jays traded for him.
Yeah.
So maybe Bo Bichette is part of a package going somewhere, even though apparently trading him is an easy no. Maybe you move off of a George Springer in a deal. I mean, he's got a small no trade clause, but maybe he's a guy they're able to flip for pitching, or like I'm not really sure. I don't really know.
Yeah. It's gonna be crazy to see what really does happen because if they are reeking of desperation as is out there, then there's gonna be like if you reek of desperation, then you're making some desperate moves, right? And that is taking shots on guys, that is overpaying for somebody, maybe that is, trying to fit a contending team where there might not be one into
Yeah, the
2025.
the the saying is, if you reek of desperation, other GMs are going to throw you an anvil, not a life support. But also, I mean, the Jays could use some heavy hitters, and I mean that anvil. Um, I don't know where I'm going with this bit, but the point is that they need to do something.
Yes, it's hopefully going to come soon because the offseason has been a little boring, even though Kevin Newman did sign today. Big news there.
Big
But
news.
one last thing before you go, give me your favorite free agent, regardless of financial considerations. Like, who is the one guy that you would be ecstatic that the Blue Jays signed? And of course, I'm going to add again, that's not named Juan Soto or Roki Sasaki.
Give me your extra profile. I know that you just spent the last,
Oh,
you know, hot minute of kind of dumping on him, but I'm a bit of a profile believer just based on the profile. I like that he is a tough out, and based on the way that the Blue Jays have talked about wanting to find guys that are hard to strike out and so forth, he fits that mold, and whether or not he's going to be able to sustain this next year and the year after and so forth, that's a different question. But I'd be pretty happy if they did go out and find themselves as the winners of the Urickson Profar sweepstakes.
yeah, like I said, I sold myself a little bit on him in the piece, so hopefully if they do end him, I would not be too upset with it. For me, the Jeff Passan listed Corbin Burns as a potential Blue Jays target or whatever. He said Burns would fit in Toronto. So he'd be mine. I think that would be a really big shock if the Blue Jays did empty the bank for him. And I know, just like Santander, there are things that are concerning people about Corbin Burns long term. But man, I love me some Corbin Burns. So he is my answer for that.
Good answer.
Thank you. All right. Well, we are going to run. Thank you very much for tuning in. Make sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons if you're watching on YouTube. You can find us there at the Bird's Eye View Pod. If you're listening along on the podcast provider of your choice, make sure to drop a follow and review. Of course, as we've mentioned multiple times, go check out our pieces on our Substack. Those links are in our bio everywhere. If you want us to tackle any specific topics this offseason or have any questions for us, you can shoot us an email at birdseyeviewpod@gmail.com. And of course, you can follow us all on Twitter. The pod is at BEV_pod. Jori is at Jori Negin-Shecter, and I am at Worden_Zach. Thank you very much for listening.